Hey there, fellow night owls. Before I begin tonight's story, I want to thank you all for the incredible support on my last upload. The comments section was alive with your theories, and I've never seen so many new subscribers in a single day. If you're new here, welcome to our little corner of the internet where we explore the things that keep us up at night. Tonight's tale is especially chilling because, well, I'm starting to wonder if it's even a story at all. I've been experiencing something strange lately, something I can't explain, and I need your help figuring out what's happening to me. So, grab your blankets, turn down the lights, and listen closely. And if any of this sounds familiar to you, please, let me know in the comments. I don't think I can face this alone much longer. The story begins now. I've always been a light sleeper. That's what I told myself anyway. The creak of floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the gentle tapping of tree branches against my bedroom window. These sounds would often pull me from the depths of sleep, leaving me staring at the ceiling, counting down the hours until dawn. But what's been happening these past few weeks is different. So different that I'm questioning my own sanity. It started on an ordinary Tuesday in late September. I had just moved into a charming craftsman bungalow in a quiet neighborhood in Portland, Oregon. The rent was surprisingly affordable for such a desirable location, and I couldn't believe my luck when the landlord chose me over dozens of other applicants. I should have known then that something wasn't right. My first night in the house was peaceful. The second night, too. But on the third night, I woke up at exactly 3:17 a.m. The red numbers on my digital clock burned through the darkness as I tried to figure out what had disturbed my sleep. The house was silent. Too silent, actually. Like the world was holding its breath, and then I heard it. A whisper. So faint I almost convinced myself it was just the wind slipping through the weathered window frames. But there was no mistaking the deliberate cadence of human speech, even if I couldn't make out the words. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet house. No response. I switched on my bedside lamp and grabbed my phone, ready to call 911 if needed. Heart pounding, I checked every room, every closet, behind every door. Nothing. No sign of an intruder. The front door was still locked, deadbolt secured. All windows closed and latched. I blamed it on the disorientation of sleeping in a new place and went back to bed. But sleep evaded me for the rest of the night. The next night, I woke again at 3:17 a.m. Same whisper, slightly louder this time, but still indecipherable. I repeated my search of the house with the same results. Nothing out of place. No one hiding in the shadows. This continued for a week, each night the same time. Each night, the whispers growing just a little bit louder, a little more insistent, but never quite clear enough to understand. I started doubting myself. Was I dreaming these whispers? Was my mind playing tricks on me? I've never had auditory hallucinations before, but isn't that what someone experiencing them would think? By the second week, I could finally make out words among the whispers. Not alone, never alone, see you. My blood ran cold the first time I clearly heard those words. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Not from outside the house, not from another room, but somehow, all around me, as if the air itself was speaking. I told my best friend Morgan about the whispers over coffee at our favorite cafe on Hawthorne Boulevard. "Sounds like you've got a classic haunting on your hands," she said with a smile, clearly not taking me seriously. Every old house has at least one ghost. It's practically a requirement in Portland. "This isn't funny," I insisted, wrapping my hands around my mug to stop them from shaking. "I haven't had a full night's sleep in 2 weeks. I'm starting to see things out of the corner of my eye. Dark shapes moving when they shouldn't be." Morgan's smile faded as she realized how disturbed I truly was. "Have you looked into the history of the house? Maybe something happened there that would explain the activity." I hadn't thought of that. That afternoon I visited the local library and searched through their archives for any mention of my address. What I found sent chills down my spine. 43 years ago, a man named Edward Kane had lived in my house. He was a recluse, known in the neighborhood for his strange behavior. He claimed to be a scientist, though no one knew what kind of research he conducted. In 1980, police were called to the house after neighbors reported not seeing Kane for several weeks. When officers entered, they found the house empty. Completely empty. No furniture, no personal belongings, and no sign of Edward Kane. He had vanished without a trace. The article mentioned one disturbing detail that made my stomach churn. Before his disappearance, Kane had told a neighbor that he had finally made contact with them and that they exist in the spaces between our perceptions. I left the library with more questions than answers. Who were they? And what did Kane mean by the spaces between our perceptions? That night, I went to bed with a mixture of dread and determination. I placed a digital recorder on my nightstand, hoping to capture the whispers as evidence that I wasn't losing my mind. As expected, I woke at 3:17 a.m., but this time, something was different. The whispers were clear as day, as if someone, or something, was speaking directly into my ear. "We see you watching. Searching. We've been waiting so long for someone to notice us." I lay frozen in fear, unable to move, unable to scream. And then I felt it for the first time. A sensation like cold fingers trailing across my forehead. Not a physical touch, but something else, like the memory of a touch. When I finally gathered the courage to turn on the light, I was alone in the room. But the air felt different, heavier, as if it had become more substantial. The next morning, I checked the recorder with trembling hands. My heart sank when I heard nothing but the sound of my own breathing and the occasional creak of the house settling. The whispers hadn't been captured. I was truly beginning to question my sanity. Was I having some kind of breakdown? Should I see a doctor, a psychiatrist? What would I even tell them? That I believed my house was whispering to me in the middle of the night. I decided to spend the next night at Morgan's apartment. I needed one night of uninterrupted sleep to clear my head and think rationally about what was happening. "Mi casa es su casa," Morgan said, making up her couch with fresh sheets and a fluffy pillow. "Stay as long as you need to." That night, I fell asleep quickly, exhausted from weeks of disrupted sleep. But at exactly 3:17 a.m., I woke with a start. The whispers had followed me. Can't escape us. We are not bound by walls, by distance. We exist everywhere, in the in-between. Morgan found me in the morning, huddled in the corner of her living room, wide-eyed and shivering despite the warm temperature. "That's it," she said firmly after I told her what happened. "We're getting you help." The doctor found nothing physically wrong with me. No ear infections that might cause auditory hallucinations. No signs of a neurological disorder. My blood work came back normal. From a medical standpoint, I was perfectly healthy. The psychiatrist I saw afterward was kind but skeptical. She suggested I might be experiencing hypnagogic hallucinations, sensory events that occurred during the transition between wakefulness and sleep. She prescribed medication to help me sleep more deeply and scheduled a follow-up appointment for the following week. I took the pills that night, desperate for relief. They knocked me out completely. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night without interruption. The reprieve lasted 3 days. On the 4th night, the medication failed. Once again, I woke at 3:17 a.m., but this time the whispers had changed. They weren't whispers anymore. They were voices, still quiet, but distinct and unmistakable. "We're getting stronger. Because of you, your attention, your fear, feeds us." And for the first time, I saw them. Not clearly, not directly, but in the periphery of my vision, shadowy figures moving along the walls, ceiling, and floor. When I turned to look directly at them, they vanished, only to reappear at the edge of my vision once more. I stumbled out of bed and turned on every light in the house, but it didn't help. The shadows persisted, darting just out of focus, their movements jerky and unnatural, like footage played at the wrong speed. By morning, I was a wreck. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did. My boss, concerned by the sound of my voice, told me to take the rest of the week off. "You sound like you're on the edge, Jace," he said. "Get some rest. The Henderson account can wait." I thanked him and hung up, then immediately called Morgan. "Can you come over, please? I think I'm really losing it this time." Morgan arrived an hour later with bagels, coffee, and a determined expression. "Okay, enough is enough. We're getting to the bottom of this today." She suggested we visit the university library to see if we could find any information about Edward Kane and his research. As a graduate student in physics, Morgan had access to academic databases that might contain Kane's published work, if he had actually been a scientist as he'd claimed. We spent hours searching through databases and finally hit pay dirt. Edward Kane had indeed been a scientist, a physicist specializing in quantum mechanics. He had published several papers in obscure journals during the 1970s, all focused on something he called interstitial reality theory. According to Kane's theory, our universe was just one of many that existed in the same physical space, separated only by differences in vibrational frequency. These universes occasionally overlapped, creating what he called thin spots, where entities from one reality could perceive and potentially interact with entities from another. "This is some serious fringe science," Morgan said, skimming through one of Kane's papers. "Most of this contradicts established quantum theory. No wonder he was publishing in journals no one's ever heard of." But something about Kane's theory resonated with me. What if the whispers, the shadows, were coming from one of these other realities? What if Kane had somehow thinned the barriers between worlds in my house? The final paper we found was dated just 2 months before Kane's disappearance. In it, he claimed to have developed a device that could attune the human perceptual apparatus to interstitial frequencies, allowing the user to perceive these other realities directly. "We need to go back to the library and find out if Kane had any family," I said. "Maybe they know what happened to his research after he disappeared." Our search led us to a nephew, Timothy Kane, who lived in a retirement community in Vancouver, Washington, just across the Columbia River from Portland. We drove there the next day. Timothy Kane was in his 70s, a retired accountant with kind eyes and a suspicious nature. It took some convincing before he agreed to speak with us about his uncle. "Uncle Eddie was brilliant," Timothy said as we sat in the community center's garden. "Too brilliant for his own good, maybe. My father, his brother, always said Eddie saw things too clearly, that he could look at a shadow and tell you exactly what was casting it, even if no one else could see the object." "Do you know what happened to him?" I asked. Timothy's expression darkened. "Officially? No. He's still listed as a missing person, but I have my theories." He told us that after Edward disappeared, he had been tasked with clearing out his uncle's house. Most of Edward's equipment and papers had already vanished, but Timothy had found a small journal hidden beneath a floorboard in the master bedroom, my bedroom. I've kept it all these years, not really understanding most of it, but maybe it's time someone else looked at it, someone who might need it. He left and returned a few minutes later with a worn leather journal. "Take it," he said, pressing it into my hands. "Maybe it can help you, because you're seeing them too, aren't you? The things in the spaces between." I stared at him, shocked by his perception. "How did you know?" "You have the same look Uncle Eddie had in the weeks before he vanished. Like you're watching something move just at the edge of your vision, all the time." The drive back to Portland was silent, the journal sitting between Morgan and me like a live bomb. When we reached my house, we sat at the kitchen table and carefully opened it. Most of the entries were fragmented thoughts, mathematical equations, and diagrams that made little sense to us. But the final entries were different, clearer, more urgent. "They are aware of me now," one entry read. "They know I can see them. They exist in a reality just adjacent to ours, feeding on attention, on perception itself. The more you notice them, the stronger they become. The stronger they become, the more they can influence our reality." The final entry sent ice through my veins. I've made a terrible mistake. The device works too well. I've opened a door that was never meant to be opened. They're coming through. God help me, they're coming through. If you're reading this, do not look for them. Do not acknowledge them. They can only fully enter our world if we invite them in with our attention. The journal ended there. "Jesus," Morgan whispered, "you don't think he was taken by whatever these things are?" I finished for her. "I don't know, but I think they're trying to do the same thing to me." That night, despite my fear, I decided to stay in my house. If these entities were already aware of me, already following me to other locations, what was the point of running? Morgan insisted on staying too, setting up camp on my living room sofa. "We'll face this together," she said with a confidence I wished I could feel. We agreed to stay awake until after 3:17 a.m. to see what would happen if we were both alert and prepared. We made coffee, turned on all the lights, and waited. As the hour approached, the air in the house began to feel different, thicker, more resistant, as if we were suddenly underwater. The lights seemed to dim despite being at full brightness. "Do you feel that?" I whispered to Morgan, who nodded, her eyes wide. "The air feels wrong, heavy." At exactly 3:17 a.m., the voices began. This time, Morgan heard them too. Two now. Twice the attention, twice the strength. We're so close. The shadows appeared as before, but more substantial now. They didn't vanish completely when we looked directly at them, merely faded slightly before re-solidifying. They moved across the walls and ceiling, occasionally reaching out toward us with elongated limbs that seemed to bend at impossible angles. Morgan grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Tell me I'm not seeing this," she said, her voice tight with fear. "You're not," I said. "We both are." For over an hour we watched as the shadows circled us, growing bolder with each pass. They began to take on more defined shapes, vaguely humanoid, but wrong in subtle ways, too tall, too thin, with too many joints in their limbs. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The air lightened. The shadows retreated. By 4:30 a.m., the house felt normal again. Morgan and I looked at each other, both shaken to our cores. "That was," she began, unable to find the words to finish. "Yeah," I agreed, "it was." We spent the rest of the night researching similar phenomena, looking for anyone else who might have experienced what we had. We found scattered accounts across paranormal forums and Reddit threads, people describing shadow beings that seemed to exist just at the edge of perception. Many of these accounts mentioned the 3 a.m. hour, the traditional witching hour, though few were as specific as the 3:17 a.m. timing we were experiencing. Some accounts ended abruptly, the users never posting again. Others described escalating encounters before suddenly claiming it had all been a hoax or a misunderstanding. These sudden retractions struck me as odd, almost forced. What if they didn't stop posting because they wanted to? I suggested to Morgan. What if they stopped because they couldn't anymore? Because they were taken? Like Edward Kane, Morgan said quietly. By morning, we had formed a theory based on Kane's research and our own experience. These entities existed in a reality parallel to our own. They couldn't fully enter our world, but they could influence it in small ways. And they fed on attention. The more we noticed them, the more real they became in our reality. So, what do we do? Morgan asked, rubbing her tired eyes. If ignoring them makes them weaker, shouldn't we just not pay attention to them? I've been trying that for weeks, I said. It doesn't work once they've noticed you noticing them. It's like they've established a connection that can't be easily broken. We decided our best hope was to find Kane's device, the one he claimed could attune human perception to these interstitial frequencies. If it could open the door to their reality, perhaps it could also close it. The next few days were a blur of research and investigation. We returned to Timothy Kane with new questions. We visited university archives. We even spoke with an elderly neighbor who had lived on my street since the 1970s and remembered Edward Kane. Strange man, the neighbor, Mrs. Abernathy, told us as she watered her immaculate front garden. Always taking measurements with odd equipment, said he was mapping the thin spots. Thin spots? I asked, recalling the term from Kane's papers. Places where the walls between worlds are weaker, according to him, she said, adjusting her wide-brimmed hat. He claimed there was a particularly thin spot in the northwest corner of his house. Your house now, I suppose. The northwest corner. My bedroom. Armed with this information, Morgan and I returned to my house and began a methodical search of my bedroom, looking for any sign of Kane's device or any other clues he might have left behind. We found nothing, until Morgan noticed something odd about the floorboards in the corner of the room. Unlike the rest of the floor, which ran in one direction, these boards ran perpendicular, creating a subtle square pattern approximately 3 feet on each side. "It's a trapdoor," Morgan said, running her fingers along the nearly invisible seam. It took us 20 minutes to figure out how to open it. A hidden catch disguised as a knot in the wood. When the trapdoor finally swung open, we found a small space beneath the floor, just large enough to hold a metal box roughly the size of a bread loaf. The box was locked, but the key was taped to its underside. Inside, we found what could only be Kane's device, a contraption of copper wire, small crystals, and what looked like primitive circuit boards, all centered around what appeared to be a modified radio dial. Also in the box was a folded piece of paper with handwritten instructions. To attune, turn dial clockwise until perception shifts. Warning, do not turn past the red mark. To close the doorway, turn dial counterclockwise until perception normalizes, then 3 additional rotations. "This is it," I breathed, holding the strange device. "This has to be what Kane used." "Are you sure we should be messing with this?" Morgan asked, eyeing the device warily. "This is what got Kane into trouble in the first place." "I'm already in trouble," I reminded her. "They're getting stronger every night. I don't think I have much time left before whatever happened to Kane happens to me." We decided to wait until 3:17 a.m. to use the device. If that was when the barrier between worlds was thinnest, it might also be when the device would be most effective. As the hour approached, the now familiar heaviness settled over the house. The shadows began to appear, more solid than ever before. They no longer darted away when we looked directly at them. Instead, they moved with deliberate slowness, circling us like predators. "Now," Morgan whispered at exactly 3:17 a.m. With shaking hands, I turned the dial on Kane's device clockwise. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The world seemed to shift, colors becoming muted, sounds becoming distant. And the shadows, the entities, came into sharp focus. They were humanoid but wrong. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. Their faces were smooth expanses of darkness with no features except for what appeared to be eyes. Not eyes as we know them, but vertical slits that glowed with a faint, sickly light. And they were everywhere. Dozens of them moving through my house as if it were their own, passing through walls and furniture with ease. Some seemed unaware of us, but others looked directly at us with those terrible glowing slits. "Enough!" Morgan gasped beside me. "Turn it back." I gripped the dial to turn it to counterclockwise, but before I could, one of the entities moved toward us with frightening speed. It reached out with an impossibly long limb, its fingers elongating until they were mere inches from my face. "See us! Feel us!" Its voice was like sand pouring over glass, so close now. "Just a little more." "The dial!" Morgan screamed. "Turn it back now." With a final surge of desperate strength, I wrenched the dial counterclockwise. The entity's fingers were just brushing my cheek, leaving trails of ice-cold numbness wherever they touched. The sensation was indescribable. Not physical pain, but something deeper, as if the very essence of me was being siphoned away. The world shifted again as I continued turning the dial. The entities began to fade, their forms becoming less substantial, their voices growing fainter. The one touching me let out a sound, not quite a scream, not quite a howl, as it was pulled back. 3 more rotations, Morgan reminded me, reading from Kane's instructions. 1. The entities were now mere shadows again, barely visible. 2. The air in the house began to lighten, the unnatural heaviness dissipating. 3. With the final rotation there was a sound like air rushing into a vacuum, and then silence. Blessed, perfect silence. Morgan and I collapsed onto the floor, both of us shaking from adrenaline and fear. For several minutes we couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Finally, Morgan broke the silence. "Are they gone?" she whispered. I looked around the room. No shadows moved along the walls. No whispers floated on the air. "I think so. For now, at least." We spent the rest of the night in a state of hypervigilance, jumping at every creak of the house settling, every rustle of the trees outside. But 4:17 a.m. came and went without incident. Then 5:17. By the time the sun rose, casting warm light through the windows, we began to believe it might truly be over. "What do we do with it?" Morgan asked, gesturing to Kane's device, which now sat on my kitchen table. "Destroy it?" I suggested. Morgan shook her head. "What if they come back? We might need it again." In the end, we decided to return the device to its hiding place beneath my bedroom floor, but with one important addition: a detailed letter explaining what had happened and how to use the device if the entities ever returned. "A warning for the next person," Morgan said, as I carefully placed the box back into its hiding spot. "Just in case." "Let's hope there never is a next person," I replied, closing the trapdoor. The following weeks passed without incident. No whispers, no shadows, no waking at 3:17 a.m. I began to sleep through the night again. The constant anxiety that had gripped me for so long gradually eased. Morgan and I tried to return to our normal lives, though we both knew we'd been fundamentally changed by what we'd experienced. We didn't speak about it often, but when our eyes met across a crowded room, I knew we were thinking the same thing. What had we really seen? And were they truly gone? A month after our confrontation with the entities, I received a letter from Timothy Kane. Inside was a yellowed newspaper clipping dated 1978, 2 years before his uncle's disappearance. The article described a series of mysterious disappearances in Portland during the mid-1970s. 5 people had vanished without a trace, all from the same neighborhood. My neighborhood. The police had found no evidence of foul play. It was as if these people had simply stepped out of reality. A handwritten note from Timothy accompanied the clipping. "Found this while clearing out some old files. Thought you should know. Uncle Eddie wasn't the first, and I doubt he'll be the last. Stay vigilant." I called Morgan immediately. "You need to see this," I told her. That night, we pored over the article, searching for any connections between the disappeared persons and Edward Kane. We found none, except for geographic proximity, but something else caught our attention. All 5 disappearances had occurred during the same week in September. The same week I had moved into my house and first heard the whispers. "It's a cycle," Morgan said. the realization dawning on her face. They can only attempt to cross over at certain times, or in certain places, I added. The thin spots Kane wrote about. We began to research other disappearances in Portland over the decades, looking for patterns. We found them. Every 7 years, people went missing in my neighborhood. Never more than 5, never less than 3. Always during the same week in September. Always without explanation. The implications were chilling. The entities hadn't been banished permanently. We had merely closed the door at the end of their feeding cycle. In 7 years, the door would open again, and they would seek new anchors in our reality, new people to notice them, to fear them, to strengthen them with attention. We need to be ready, I said to Morgan as we sat on my porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. We will be, she assured me, her hand finding mine. And maybe we can find others who've experienced this. Build a network. Make sure no one ever has to face them alone again. And that's what we've been doing for the past year. Gathering stories, collecting evidence, preparing for their return. It's why I started this channel, to find others like us. To warn those who might be vulnerable. So now you know my story. The invisible threat that nearly drove me insane wasn't just in my head. It was something much worse. Something that exists just beyond the edge of normal perception, waiting for someone to notice it. Waiting to be invited in. If you've experienced something similar, whispers in the night, shadows moving where they shouldn't, the feeling of being watched by something you can't quite see, please reach out in the comments. You're not crazy, you're not alone. And if you're in Portland, especially in the Selwood neighborhood, be careful. Be particularly careful in September 2027. That's when they'll return. That's when the thin spots will open again. I'll be posting more about what I've learned in the coming weeks, including ways to protect yourself if you think you might be experiencing what I did. Subscribe to make sure you don't miss anything. Your life might literally depend on it. And one more thing. If you ever wake at exactly 3:17 a.m. for no apparent reason, whatever you do, don't listen for the whispers. Don't look for the shadows. Turn on all the lights, put in earbuds, play loud music, focus on anything else. Because once they know you can see them, they'll never stop trying to reach you. Sleep well, everyone. And remember, sometimes ignorance really is bliss. What about you? Have you ever experienced anything like this? Let me know in the comments, and if this story kept you up at night, please share it with someone else who needs to lose a little sleep. After all, misery loves company. Story number 2. Have you ever had that feeling? That creeping sensation that something is watching you from the shadows? That prickling along your spine when you're alone in the dark? I used to think it was just my imagination. The product of too many late-night horror movies and an overactive mind. But now, I know better. Now, I know what lurks in the darkness, waiting and watching. And once you hear my story, you'll never look at the shadows the same way again. I first noticed something was wrong 3 weeks ago, on a crisp October evening in my small Vermont town. The kind of night where the wind whispers through the trees and the moonlight casts long, distorted shadows across the leaf-strewn ground. I had lived here my entire life, knew every street, every path, every shortcut. This was home. Safe, familiar, predictable. I was walking home from my shift at Miller's Diner, taking my usual shortcut through Oakwood Park. The streetlights there had been out for months, budget cuts according to the town council. But I'd made the trip so many times I could navigate it blindfolded. Besides, I had my phone flashlight, though I hardly needed it with the full moon overhead casting everything in its silvery glow. The night was quiet. Almost too quiet. No chirping crickets, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Just the soft crunch of fallen leaves beneath my boots as I followed the winding path through the trees. I was humming to myself, some pop song that had been playing on repeat at the diner all evening when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic sound that made me stop mid-step, Thud, 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 like footsteps, but heavier, more deliberate. The sound of something large moving through the underbrush, parallel to the path I was on. I held my breath, straining to hear better in the stillness of the night. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast darkness. "Is someone there?" No response. Just that continued methodical thud, thud, thud. The sound matched my pace exactly, speeding up when I quickened my steps, slowing when I did, stopping completely when I froze in place. It wasn't an echo, it was something else, something following me with deliberate precision. My heart began to race, sweat beating on my forehead despite the cool autumn air. I reached for my phone to call someone, anyone, but found my pockets empty. With a sinking feeling, I realized I'd left it charging behind the counter at the diner. By the time I reached the park exit, I was practically running. The iron gates loomed ahead, and beyond them, the comforting glow of streetlights. Just as I passed through, I couldn't help but look back. Where moonlight illuminated the path and trees, there was a section of absolute darkness. A void. A patch of night darker than the rest, roughly the size and shape of a large man. But not a man, definitely not a man. As it moved between two oaks with a fluid grace that no human could mimic, I caught a glimpse of eyes. Not reflecting moonlight like an animal's would, but absorbing it. Two perfect circles of complete darkness, somehow darker than the darkness surrounding them. I ran all the way home, not stopping until I'd locked the door behind me and checked every room, every closet, every shadowy corner of my apartment. Nothing was out of place, nothing was missing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me home, something that was now watching me from just beyond the edge of my vision. The next few days were uneventful, almost suspiciously normal. I stuck to well-lit streets, avoided the park entirely, and tried to convince myself it had all been in my imagination, a trick of the light, an overreaction to ordinary night sounds. After all, I had been working double shifts at the diner, was exhausted most nights. Stress and fatigue could make anyone jumpier than usual. But deep down, I knew better. Something had been watching me that night. Something had been following me. On the fourth night, I stayed late at the diner to help with inventory. Katie, the night manager, offered to drive me home, but she lived in the opposite direction, and I didn't want to be a bother. Besides, I told myself, I was being silly. There was nothing following me, nothing watching me from the shadows. As I turned onto Cedar Avenue, just 2 blocks from my apartment, the street grew quieter. The houses here were older, set further back from the road, many of them dark at this hour. The streetlights seemed dimmer somehow, the pools of light more isolated, the darkness between them deeper and more impenetrable. That's when I heard it again, that same rhythmic sound just slightly out of sync with my own footsteps. Thud, thud, thud. I increased my pace, my right hand clenched around my keys with one protruding between my fingers, a makeshift weapon my mother had taught me years ago, 20 yards from my apartment. 10. I was fumbling for my keys when I felt it. A cold breath on the back of my neck, not just cold, but freezing, like standing in front of an open freezer on a hot summer day. I whirled around, keys clutched in my outstretched hand, ready to strike. Nothing there, just the empty sidewalk stretching back into darkness. But at my feet, stretching back the way I had come, was a trail of footprints? No, not quite. More like disturbances in the light dusting of fallen leaves. Depressions that could have been made by something heavy moving along the same path I had taken. I flew up the stairs to my apartment, slamming and locking the door behind me. All night, I sat with my back against the wall, lights blazing in every room, a kitchen knife clutched in my trembling hands. When morning finally came, I peered out through a crack in the blinds. The sidewalk below was empty, peaceful in the early light. Gathering my courage, I opened my front door just enough to check the steps. There, on the third step from the top, was a perfect circle of dead leaves, arranged deliberately, and in the center, a small, smooth stone, black as night, with a single streak of white running through it like a scar. I slammed the door shut and spent the day huddled on my couch, unable to sleep, unable to think clearly through the fog of fear and confusion. That evening, desperate for answers, I researched local folklore online, hoping to find some explanation for what was happening to me. Most of what I found was typical ghost story stuff. Abandoned houses with tragic histories, hitchhiking phantoms, the usual urban legends every small town seems to cultivate. But then I stumbled across a blog post about our town's history written by a local historian. It mentioned that before European settlers arrived, Native American tribes avoided this valley entirely. They believed it was home to a creature they called the One Who Walks Between, a being that existed in the space between light and darkness. According to legend, this creature became fixated on certain individuals, following them for days or weeks, leaving small tokens to mark them as its own. Eventually, it would take them. Those people simply disappeared, never to be seen again. The post included an illustration from an old manuscript, a crude drawing of a tall, distorted figure with two long limbs and what looked like two dark holes where eyes should be. That night, I dreamed I was in Oakwood Park, but it wasn't as I remembered it. The trees were older, twisted into unnatural shapes. The paths wound in directions that made no sense, sometimes seeming to loop back on themselves, sometimes leading to places that couldn't possibly exist within the confines of the park I knew. All around me, shadows moved independently, flowing like water between the trees, gathering in hollows, watching me with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. The shadows converged, forming a larger darkness directly in front of me. Slowly, it took shape, vaguely humanoid, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin in some places, too broad in others, and those eyes, those same light-devouring eyes. "I have chosen you," it said, its voice like rustling leaves and creaking branches. "You are marked. You are mine." I woke gasping for air, sheets soaked with sweat, and there, in the corner of my bedroom, was that same unnatural patch of darkness, watching, waiting. It raised what might have been an arm and pointed at me. I blinked, and it was gone. But on my nightstand sat a small, smooth black stone with a white streak, identical to the one from my steps. I quit my job that day and fled town without even giving notice. By sunset, I was in my car, heading west on I-91, with no real destination in mind, just away. As far away as possible from whatever was hunting me. I drove through the night, stopping only for gas and coffee, pushing myself to stay awake, to put as many miles as possible between me and Vermont. By dawn, I had crossed into New York State. I began to breathe easier, to think that maybe, just maybe, I had escaped. That's when I noticed it, sitting on the passenger seat beside me where nothing had been moments before. A small, smooth, black stone with a single streak of white running through it. The stones continued to appear no matter where I fled. In Chicago, I found one in my coffee cup at a diner. In Denver, one was waiting on the pillow of my hotel bed. In Salt Lake City, I woke to find one clutched in my hand, though I had no memory of picking it up. For 3 weeks, I ran. Changed names, paid cash, stayed in rundown motels where the desk clerks didn't ask questions or make eye contact. I grew gaunt, my clothes hanging loose on my frame, dark circles forming under my eyes from lack of sleep. I jumped at shadows, flinched at every sudden noise. The constant vigilance was wearing me down, body and mind. One morning, in a small town in Idaho, whose name I can't even remember, I found something new. A folded slip of paper beneath my hotel room door. The handwriting was strange, the letters flowing together in patterns that seemed to shift and change as I stared at them. But the message was clear. "Stop running. I will find you wherever you go. It's time we talked." I sat on the edge of the bed, the note trembling in my hands, and felt something inside me break. Or perhaps it was something inside me finally coming together. The fear that had driven me for weeks was still there, but alongside it now was something else. A resigned sort of curiosity, a need to know, to understand what wanted me so badly that it would follow me across the country. "Fine," I whispered to the empty room. "You want to talk? Let's talk." That night I drove east, back toward Vermont, back to where it all began. I drove for 2 days straight, stopping only when absolute exhaustion demanded it. When I crossed into Vermont late on the third night, a strange calm settled over me. I was no longer running from something. I was moving towards something. The difference was subtle but profound. I reached my hometown just after midnight. The streets were deserted, the houses dark, everyone tucked safely in their beds, unaware of what walked among them in the night. I drove directly to Oakwood Park, pulling into the empty lot and sitting there for a long moment, engine idling, headlights illuminating the iron gates. This was it, the place where I had first seen it. First felt its gaze upon me. I cut the engine, plunging myself into darkness. The only light came from the full moon overhead, the same phase as that first night I realized. A complete lunar cycle had passed since this began. I got out of the car and walked to the gates. They were locked at this hour, but I knew another way in. A gap in the fence behind the old caretaker's shed that kids had been using for generations to sneak into the park after hours. I slipped through and made my way along the familiar path, using only the moonlight to guide me. The clearing lay ahead. A wide, grassy space surrounded by ancient oaks, with a single massive tree at its center. As a child, I had played here countless times, had climbed that central oak, had picnicked in its shade, had used it as a home base in games of tag, never once suspecting what lurked nearby, watching from the spaces between light and shadow. I stood in the center of the clearing, moonlight bathing everything in silver. My shadow stretched out long before me, a dark stain against the pale grass. I turned slowly, taking in the full 360 degrees of my surroundings. Nothing moved, nothing made a sound. The night was utterly, unnaturally still. "I'm here," I called out, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. I stopped running. "I'm waiting, like you asked." No response, just the continued heavy silence. "What do you want from me?" I tried again, a hint of anger creeping into my voice now. "Why are you following me? Why did you choose me?" Still nothing, but the air around me seemed to thicken, as if the darkness itself was coalescing, becoming more substantial. The shadows beneath the surrounding trees deepened, stretching toward me like grasping fingers. And then, like ink spreading through water, it appeared, flowing out from behind the ancient oak, that patch of absolute darkness taking shape before my eyes. Vaguely humanoid but wrong in subtle, disturbing ways. Too tall, limbs too long, proportions slightly askew. It moved with a fluid grace that was both beautiful and terrifying, each motion defying what I knew about how bodies should move. And those eyes, those terrible, empty eyes, fixed directly on me. We regarded each other across the clearing, the hunter and its prey finally face to face. I should have been terrified, should have turned and run screaming into the night. But instead I felt an odd sort of calm settle over me. A sense that whatever happened next had been inevitable from the moment I first heard those footsteps following me through this very park. Slowly, deliberately, the shadow being raised its arm and beckoned to me with one long, distorted finger. And God help me, I stepped forward. The moment I stepped into the clearing, the air changed. The silence deepened, becoming almost tangible. The moonlight dimmed, as if reluctant to touch the space around this creature. With each step I took toward it, the temperature dropped. until I could see my breath fogging despite the mild autumn night. 10 feet away, I stopped, close enough to see details, the way its edges blurred into the surrounding darkness, the strange texture of its surface, less like flesh and more like shadow given substance, like a hole cut into reality itself. "What are you?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. The being tilted what passed for its head, regarding me with something like curiosity. Then it spoke, not aloud but directly into my mind, a voice like dry leaves rustling, like branches creaking in the wind. "I am old," it said, "older than your kind, older than the trees that grow here, older than the mountains themselves." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold air. I was speaking with something ancient, something that had walked this land long before humans ever set foot here. "What do you want from me?" I demanded. "Why have you been following me? Why did you chase me across the country?" "Because you can see me," it replied. "Truly see me. Few of your kind can. Most look right through me, as if I were nothing but ordinary shadow. But you have the gift, the sight." I thought back to that first night in the park, how the shadow had stood out to me, distinct from the natural darkness. "The stones," I said. "What do they mean? Why leave them for me to find?" "They are markers, anchors between your world and the spaces where I dwell. They allow me to find you no matter how far you run, to maintain our connection across distances that would otherwise sever it. And the note? Why tell me to stop running? Because there is no point in running from what is inevitable, and because I have grown fond of you in my way. I did not wish to cause you such distress." "Fond of me?" I repeated incredulously. "You've been terrorizing me for weeks. I haven't slept. I've lost weight. I quit my job, abandoned my home, all because of you." "That was not my intention," it said, and I heard regret in that unearthly voice. "I merely wish to know you better, to understand what makes you different from the others, those who cannot see." I ran a hand through my hair, trying to process what I was hearing. This thing hadn't been hunting me out of malice or hunger. It had been curious about me, studying me, like a scientist might study a rare specimen. "And now? What happens now?" I asked, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I was, alone in this dark park with a creature from beyond normal reality. The shadow was silent for a long moment, those dark eyes never leaving mine. Then it extended what might have been a hand, a gesture not threatening, but almost beseeching. "Now, I offer you a choice," it said. "I can leave you, if that is what you truly wish. Remove my markers, never cross your path again. You can return to your life, pretend none of this happened." Relief flooded through me. It was offering me an out, a way back to normalcy. But before I could speak, it continued. "Or," it said, "you can come with me. See what I see, learn what I know, walk between the worlds as I do." "Come with you?" Where would we go? To the spaces between, the places where light and darkness meet but do not mix. The realm your kind glimpses only in dreams and nightmares. If I went with you, would I come back? "Yes," it said. "And no, you would return, but not as you are now. You would be changed, as all are who glimpse what lies beyond the veil of your reality." Changed how? I pressed. "You would see what has always been there, hidden in plain sight. The shadows that move independently of their casters. The spaces that are larger inside than out. The creatures that watch from corners of rooms when you think you are alone." It paused. "You would see the truth of your world, and you could never unsee it." I weighed its words carefully. The rational part of my mind screamed that this was madness, that I should accept its offer to leave me alone, to return to my normal life and forget this encounter ever happened. But another part of me, a deeper part, recognized the truth in what it said. I had always seen things others missed, glimpsed movement where there should be stillness, heard whispers in empty rooms, felt watched when I was supposedly alone. Maybe I had never been alone. Maybe I had always been able to sense the spaces between worlds, even if I hadn't understood what I was sensing. I realized something that should have been obvious from the start. This being had had countless opportunities to harm me. It had been in my bedroom, had followed me across multiple states, had literally left me notes. Yet here I stood, unharmed. Maybe it was telling the truth. Maybe it really had just been trying to know me in its alien, incomprehensible way. "How do I know I can trust you?" I asked. The shadow rippled, almost like a shrug. "You don't," it replied simply. "Trust is a human concept. I offer only truth as I understand it." I closed my eyes, weighing my options, my future hanging in the balance of this impossible choice. When I opened them again, I had made my decision. "Show me," I said. "Show me what you see, but I want your promise that I can return if I choose to. You have my word. As freely as you choose to come, you may choose to return." I hesitated only a moment longer, then reached out and took what passed for its hand. The world shifted. One moment I was standing in Oakwood Park under the full moon, and the next I was elsewhere. Not quite in the park anymore, but not entirely gone from it either. It was as if I was seeing two realities layered atop one another. The familiar trees and paths transposed over something far stranger and more ancient. The trees were still trees, but somehow more. Their bark rippled with patterns that formed and reformed, their branches reaching toward the sky in ways that defied normal geometry. The path beneath my feet pulsed faintly, as if alive, responding to our presence. And the shadows moved. Not just the one beside me, my guide into this strange half-world, but all of them. Flowing between trees, pooling in hollows, stretching and contracting with what could only be described as curiosity. "This is the first threshold," my companion said. "The space where your world and mine overlap, where the veil is thinnest. The colors were different here, deeper, richer, with shades I had no names for. The air tasted electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. Sounds carried differently, echoing in ways that shouldn't be possible in an open space. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once, familiar yet utterly alien. "It's incredible," I breathed, surprised by my own reaction. "Yes," agreed the shadow being, "it is. Your kind glimpses this beauty sometimes, in dreams, in moments of meditation, in the spaces between wakefulness and sleep. Few see it clearly, fewer still remember when they return." We came to the ancient oak at the center of the clearing, but it was not the oak as I had known it. This tree was vast, its trunk wide enough that 20 people could not have encircled it, its branches reaching up beyond sight into a sky that was no longer simply night, but a swirling tapestry of darkness and stars unlike any I had ever seen. At its base was an opening, not carved but seemingly grown, an archway of living wood that led into darkness deeper than any cave. "This is the way to the deeper places," my guide said, "to the true space between worlds. Few of your kind have ever walked there. Fewer still have returned unchanged." "Is that where you wanted to take me? When you were following me?" "Eventually," it admitted, "but not until you were ready. Not until you understood what was being offered, and could choose freely." "Why me?" I asked again. "Of all the people in the world, why choose me?" The shadow being was silent for a long moment. Then it touched my forehead with one elongated finger. Memories flooded through me, memories I had forgotten or suppressed. As a child, seeing shapes move in my closet that my parents insisted were just clothes. As a teenager, hearing whispers in empty rooms that friends swore they couldn't hear. As an adult, always sensing when I was being watched, even when no one else was around. You have always seen, the shadow said. Always known, on some level, that there was more to your world than what others perceived. It is rare among your kind. Precious. So I'm not crazy, I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. No, it said with kindness in that otherworldly voice. Not crazy, just awake in a world of sleepers. And if I go through there, I said, nodding toward the opening in the tree, what happens? You would gain understanding that few humans possess, see connections others miss, know truths others deny. You would walk between worlds, as I do, though always anchored to your own. And the price? I asked, because there's always a price for knowledge. Solitude, it said simply. Those who see cannot unsee, cannot pretend, cannot fully rejoin the sleepers. It is lonely to be awake when others dream. I understood then why this being had been following me, not out of malice or hunger, but out of recognition, out of kinship. It was lonely, just as I had been lonely all my life without fully understanding why. Different in ways I couldn't articulate, seeing things others missed, feeling things others didn't. It had recognized in me a potential companion, someone who could understand what it was like to exist in the spaces between. Your grandmother fled, as you did, it said unexpectedly. Your mother. She chose differently. Another memory surfaced, my mother telling me bedtime stories about shadow people, about a friendly darkness that watched over our family. Stories my father had eventually forbidden altogether. She went through, I whispered, into the deeper places. She did. She walks between worlds now. Perhaps someday your paths will cross in the spaces between. Tears filled my eyes. My mother hadn't abandoned us when I was 7, as I'd always been told. She had made a choice, taken a different path, one I now stood on the threshold of myself. It is time to return, said the shadow gently. Dawn approaches. The threshold grows thinner with the light. The world shifted again, and I was back in Oakwood Park as I knew it. Ordinary trees, ordinary path, the first gray light of dawn touching the eastern sky. But I knew now, knew what lay beneath the surface of things, what existed in the spaces between light and shadow, between sleeping and waking, between one world and the next. And I knew I would return. Not today, but someday, when I was ready to embrace the solitude that came with true seeing. As I walked back toward my car, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The fear that had been my constant companion for weeks was gone, replaced by anticipation, by wonder. I wasn't being hunted. I was being invited. And somewhere in the shadows, I knew my guide was watching, waiting. Patient as only an ancient being could be, I would return to the threshold, to the door in the great tree, to the deeper places beyond, and maybe, just maybe, to a mother I had thought lost forever. But for now, I walked back into the waking world, carrying the secret knowledge of what existed in the darkness. Not a beast, but a being. Not a predator, but a guide. And as I reached my car, I felt something in my pocket that hadn't been there before. A smooth black stone with a white streak running through it. But this time, I didn't feel fear. I felt promise. Days passed, then weeks. I found a new job, rented a new apartment. To anyone watching, I appeared to be a normal person living a normal life. But inside, I had changed. The world looked different to me now. Colors seemed more vibrant. Sounds carried hidden harmonies. And the shadows were never just shadows anymore. Sometimes, late at night, I would catch glimpses of movement where there should be none. Feel a familiar coolness in the air. Find a black stone with a white streak placed carefully on my windowsill or beside my coffee cup. I knew I was being watched over, protected, waited for. I began researching. Old folklore, ancient myths, accounts of people who had disappeared and reappeared changed. I started journaling my experiences, both from before my encounter and after. The more I wrote, the more I remembered. Childhood incidents, teenage experiences, adult moments of strangeness that suddenly made sense in this new context. 3 months after that night in the park, I received a package. No return address, no postmark, just a small brown box sitting on my doorstep when I returned from work. Inside was a journal, its leather cover worn from years of handling. I opened it to the first page and recognized my mother's handwriting immediately. For when you're ready to see. The journal detailed her own experiences with the shadow being. Her first sightings as a child, the stones, the invitation. Her journeys into what she called the thin places, and her eventual decision to go deeper, to walk permanently between worlds. The final entry was dated just a week before she disappeared. I've seen more than I ever thought possible, learned more than I could have imagined. But the price is growing steeper. I feel myself becoming less anchored to this world with each journey. Soon, I will have to choose, to remain here and lose my ability to see, or to go deeper and leave behind all I know. I think of my child, so young, already showing signs of the sight. Will you understand, my little one, when you're grown? Will you forgive me for choosing the shadows? Perhaps someday you'll stand at the same threshold, and perhaps then we'll meet again in the spaces between. Tears streamed down my face as I read her words. All these years I had believed she had abandoned us, had resented her, even hated her at times. But she had made a choice that I now understood all too well. That night I dreamed of the ancient oak and its hidden doorway, of shadows that moved with purpose and intelligence, of a familiar figure waiting for me at the threshold, arms outstretched in welcome. I woke with a black stone clutched in my hand and knew that soon, very soon, I would return to Oakwood Park, would walk again between worlds, would take the next step on a journey begun generations ago. The shadow being had chosen me, as it had chosen my mother and grandmother before me. Not to hunt me, not to harm me, but to guide me home. Have you ever had that feeling? That creeping sensation of being watched? Maybe it's not fear you're feeling, but recognition. Maybe what lurks in the darkness isn't hunting you after all. Maybe it's waiting for you to finally see it. To acknowledge the truth that reality is bigger, stranger, and more wonderfully terrifying than most people ever realize. The next time you feel eyes on you in an empty room, or notice a shadow that doesn't match its source, don't run. Don't hide. Look closer. Sleep well tonight. And if you feel eyes on you in the dark, smile back. Have you ever had that feeling? That creeping sensation of being watched? Maybe it's not fear you're feeling, but recognition. The next time you feel eyes on you in an empty room, or notice a shadow that doesn't match its source, don't run. Don't hide. Look closer. Sleep well tonight. And if you feel eyes on you in the dark, smile back. Story number 3. Have you ever felt someone watching you when you're completely alone? That prickle on the back of your neck, the sudden chill that has nothing to do with the temperature. I never believed in ghosts before that winter in Vermont. Now, I'm not so sure what I believe anymore. What I experienced changed everything I thought I knew about reality. If you're listening to this in bed right now, you might want to check that your doors are locked. Because after hearing my story, every creak and shadow in your home will take on new meaning. If this story resonates with you, or if you've had similar experiences, I'd love to hear about them in the comments. And if you want more stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Trust me, what happened to me could happen to anyone, even you. And now, my story begins. The rental cabin looked exactly like the photos online. Charming, rustic, and completely isolated at the end of a winding dirt road in rural Vermont. Perfect for someone trying to finish writing a novel without distractions. I'd saved for months to afford this 3-month winter retreat, hoping the snowy isolation would finally cure my writer's block. "Well, this is it," I muttered to myself, pulling my ancient Honda Civic up to the cabin as dusk settled over the pine forest. The real estate agent had left the key under the mat as promised. No need for a personal meeting, something about staffing issues at the agency, fine by me. I wasn't in a socializing mood anyway. The cabin creaked as I pushed open the heavy wooden door. Musty air greeted me, along with the faint smell of old fireplaces and pine. I flicked on the lights and surveyed my home for the next 3 months. Rustic furniture, a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, and stairs leading to what I assumed was the bedroom. Quaint, quiet, exactly what I needed. By 9 o'clock, I had unpacked my clothes, set up my writing station by the window overlooking the frozen pond behind the cabin, and heated up a can of soup for dinner. As I sat at the kitchen table eating, I heard it for the first time. A soft thud from upstairs, like something being set down on the wooden floor. I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth. Had a branch hit the roof? I listened intently, but the cabin had fallen silent again except for the occasional pop from the fireplace. Probably just the old building settling, I told myself. That night, I slept restlessly. The unfamiliar sounds of the forest kept waking me. An owl hooting, branches scratching against the roof, the wind whistling through some unseen gap in the windows, and beneath it all, occasionally, what sounded like footsteps across the floor downstairs. I woke at dawn, groggy and unrested. The bedroom was freezing, despite the cabin's heating system. My breath came out in visible puffs, and I hurriedly pulled on a sweater before heading downstairs to check the thermostat. That's when I noticed it. The front door was ajar, just slightly, allowing a thin line of early morning light to cut across the living room floor. A dusting of snow had blown in, creating a small wet patch on the hardwood. "I know I locked that door," I whispered. I distinctly remembered turning the deadbolt before going to bed. It had been the last thing I did. I approached the door cautiously, peering outside. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, covering everything in pristine white. And there, clearly visible in the snow leading away from my cabin, footprints, a single set, starting right at my door and heading into the forest. My heart hammered against my ribs. Someone had been in my cabin. Or, had someone been in my cabin when I arrived and left during the night? I slammed the door shut and locked it, then systematically searched every closet, under every bed, inside every possible hiding place. Nothing. I was alone. I called the real estate agency as soon as their office opened. "Mountain View Rentals, how can I help you?" The woman's voice was cheerful, with that distinctive Vermont accent. "Hi, this is Thomas Mercer. I checked into the Larkspur cabin yesterday and I think someone may have been inside last night." "Inside the cabin, you mean?" She sounded genuinely confused. "Yes. The front door was open this morning and there are footprints leading away in the snow." "Oh dear. Did you check if anything was missing?" I hadn't even thought of that. "No, let me look around." I did a quick inventory while still on the phone. My laptop was untouched on the desk. My wallet was still on the nightstand. Nothing seemed disturbed. Everything seems to be here. Well, that's good news at least. You know, Mr. Mercer, these old cabins can be tricky. The doors sometimes don't catch properly if it's windy, and the footprints could be from the cleaner who was there yesterday morning. But I'll send our maintenance person over today to check the locks, if that would make you feel better. I agreed, thanked her, and hung up. Her explanation made sense. Rational, logical sense. But it didn't explain the noises I'd heard during the night, or the distinct feeling that I wasn't alone. Despite my unease, I drove into town for groceries as planned. As I loaded bags into my car, an elderly man approached me, leaning heavily on a wooden cane. His weathered face was deeply lined, his eyes a startling bright blue against his tanned skin. "You staying at the Larkspur cabin?" he asked without preamble. I paused, groceries half in the trunk. "Yes." "How did you know?" He gestured toward my car with Massachusetts plates. Not many rental options this time of year, plus I recognized the look. "Bit spooked, aren't you?" "What do you mean?" He chuckled, a dry sound like leaves rustling. "That cabin's got a reputation. Nothing bad, mind you, just unusual. People report strange things. Noises, items moved, doors opening." A chill ran down my spine. "You're saying it's haunted?" "Haunted's a strong word. I prefer to think of it as watched over." He extended a gnarled hand. "Name's Harold Grantham. My family owned that land for generations before it was sold off." I shook his hand. "Thomas Mercer. So, what exactly are you saying about the cabin?" Harold glanced around as if making sure we weren't overheard. "Back in '72 there was a family living there, the Colemans. Nice folks. Their daughter, Eliza, she was about 12. Curious girl, always exploring the woods. One winter day she went out and never came back." "She got lost in the forest?" I asked. "That's what they figured. Search parties combed those woods for weeks, never found a trace." He tapped his cane against the asphalt. "Some say she's still out there, watching over the cabin, waiting to come home." That night, I made sure to double-check every window and door before going to bed. I even placed a chair under the front doorknob, an old trick from my college days in dodgy apartments. Nothing was getting in without me knowing about it. I worked on my novel until almost midnight, the words finally flowing after months of struggle. The main character, a detective investigating disappearances in a small town, was taking shape in ways I hadn't anticipated. I went to bed feeling accomplished, despite the lingering unease from Harold's story. The sound that woke me came around 3 a.m. A gentle tapping, like fingernails against glass. I sat up in bed, heart racing, and looked toward the bedroom window. Nothing there, just darkness and the silhouettes of pine trees. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from downstairs. I slipped out of bed, grabbing my phone for light and a heavy paperweight from the bedside table as an improvised weapon. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet as I crept toward the stairs. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was coming from the living room window, the large one overlooking the frozen pond. I descended the stairs slowly, straining to see in the darkness. The moonlight reflecting off the snow outside provided just enough illumination to make out shapes. I reached the bottom of the stairs and froze. There, at the window, was a small handprint pressed against the glass from the outside. A child's handprint visible in the frost that had formed on the pane. As I watched, paralyzed, another print appeared beside it, as if someone, something, was standing outside touching the window. Eliza? The name escaped my lips before I could stop it. The tapping stopped instantly. The handprints remained on the glass, slowly melting around the edges. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at those small handprints. They shouldn't have been possible. The window was at least 6 feet off the ground from the outside. Eventually, I found the courage to approach the window. The prints were still there, undeniable in the moonlight. I touched the glass from my side, lining my adult hand up with the child-sized one on the other side. The glass was ice cold. Suddenly, a wind picked up outside, howling around the eaves of the cabin. The trees swayed, branches clacking together like bones. And in that wind, just for a moment, I thought I heard a child's laughter. I spent the rest of the night huddled on the couch, lights on, waiting for dawn. The handprints had faded by morning, leaving no evidence of what I'd seen. If it weren't for the dark circles under my eyes and the lingering terror, I might have convinced myself it was just a nightmare. After that night, things escalated quickly. Objects moved when I wasn't looking, my keys appearing on the kitchen table when I was sure I'd left them by the door. my coffee mug sliding across the counter by itself, books rearranging themselves on the shelf. Small things, subtle things, but impossible to ignore. And the noises continued. Footsteps upstairs when I was downstairs. The sound of a child humming a tuneless melody from somewhere in the cabin when I was trying to write. Once, a girl's laughter right behind me, so close I spun around expecting to see someone there, but I was always alone. A week after the handprint incident, I drove back into town and struck up a conversation with the waitress at the local diner, a woman in her 60s named Martha. "You're staying at the Larkspur cabin, aren't you?" she asked as she refilled my cup. "Harold mentioned he met you, said you seemed like a nice young man." I smiled wearily. "That's me. The cabin's interesting. Experiencing some unusual occurrences." Her tone was casual, but her eyes were sharp with interest. "You could say that. Harold told me about a girl who disappeared from there. Eliza Coleman?" Martha nodded solemnly. "A tragic story. I was just a girl myself when it happened, but I remember the search parties. The whole town came together to look for her." "And they never found her?" "Not a trace. Some thought she might have fallen through the ice on that pond behind the cabin, but it was frozen solid that year. Others said wild animals got her, but most folks around here," she lowered her voice, "most think something else happened." I leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "There were rumors about the father, Edward Coleman. He had a temper, especially when he drank. Some say." She glanced around and leaned closer. "Some say Eliza didn't get lost at all, that it was made to look that way." My blood ran cold. "Are you saying her father killed her?" Martha straightened up abruptly. "I'm not saying anything of the sort, just repeating old gossip, which I shouldn't be doing. It was never proven, and Edward Coleman died himself not long after. Heart attack. The mother moved away. The whole thing's just a sad chapter in town history." That night, back at the cabin, I found myself speaking aloud to the empty rooms. "Eliza, if you're here, I'm not afraid of you. I just want to understand what happened." There was no response, no suddenly moving objects or ghostly laughter. Just the normal creaks and sighs of an old cabin in the wind. I slept surprisingly well that night, no disturbances waking me. But in the morning, I found something on my writing desk that sent ice through my veins. A crude drawing done in pencil on the back of one of my manuscript pages. A child's drawing of a man with a scary face standing over a smaller figure. And between them, something that looked like a knife. I sat down hard in my desk chair staring at the drawing. If I'd had any doubts before about Harold's story or Martha's gossip, they were gone now. Something was in this cabin with me, something trying to communicate. On a hunch, I drove into town and found Susan Bishop, who the local librarian mentioned had been Eliza's best friend growing up. She was reluctant to talk at first, but when I described the strange events at the cabin, her expression shifted to one of pained recognition. "Eliza was afraid of her father," she finally told me, her voice flat. "He hurt her. Not all the time, and never where it would show, but she told me about it. Made me promise never to tell anyone." My throat tightened. "Did you tell anyone when she disappeared?" Susan shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I was 12. I was scared, and I'd promised her. By the time I got up the courage to tell my parents, weeks had passed, and Edward Coleman had died. Everyone said it was the stress and guilt of losing his daughter that caused his heart attack." "What do you think happened to her?" "I think he killed her. Maybe by accident, maybe not. I think he buried her somewhere on that property, and when the search parties came looking, he just played the part of the grieving father." That night, I dozed off in the living room chair and dreamed of a young girl with long dark hair standing by the frozen pond, beckoning to me. In the dream, I followed her into the forest, through the snow-covered trees, to a clearing I'd never seen before. There, beneath a distinctive rock formation, She pointed at the ground, her face solemn. I woke with a start, dawn light filtering through the windows. The dream had been vivid, unlike any normal dream, and I knew, somehow, that it had been more than just my subconscious processing the day's conversations. Eliza had been showing me something. I spent that morning exploring the property around the cabin, looking for the distinctive rock formation from my dream. After nearly 2 hours of searching, I was about to give up when I glimpsed it through the trees. A natural stone archway formed by 2 large boulders leaning against each other, exactly as I'd seen in my dream. My heart pounding, I approached the formation. The clearing around it was small, the ground covered in pristine snow. But in my dream, Eliza had pointed at the ground beneath these rocks. I returned to the cabin and drove into town, purchasing a shovel from the hardware store. Back at the clearing, I began to dig, breaking through the frozen topsoil with effort. 3 feet down, my shovel hit something that wasn't earth or stone. My blood turned to ice as I carefully brushed away the dirt, revealing a small bone. Human, unmistakably human. I stumbled back, nearly falling, my mind racing. This was no longer a ghost story or local legend. This was evidence of a crime, a decades-old murder. I had to call the police. Within an hour, the clearing was filled with police. The sheriff, a tall woman with a weathered face named Sheriff Harmon, questioned me extensively about why I'd been digging in that specific spot. Just seemed like an interesting landmark, I explained weakly. I'm a writer. I was exploring for inspiration. She didn't look convinced, but had more pressing concerns than my dubious story. They'd confirmed the bones were human and, judging by size, likely belonged to a child. The next few days were a blur. Forensic teams excavated the site, eventually recovering a nearly complete skeleton. The preliminary assessment confirmed it was likely Eliza Coleman. The size, age, and time frame all matched. They also found fragments of clothing and, most damning of all, a kitchen knife buried with the remains. Susan Bishop identified a bracelet found with the bones as one she'd given Eliza for her 12th birthday. DNA tests would take time, but no one doubted who they'd found. The town was in an uproar. Old gossip suddenly became a confirmed murder case, albeit one where the prime suspect, Edward Coleman, had been dead for nearly 50 years. Local papers ran headlines about justice for Eliza and mystery finally solved. Only Susan knew the truth, or at least suspected it. When we spoke privately, she squeezed my hand and whispered, "She chose you to find her. Thank you for listening." Through it all, the cabin remained quiet. No more mysterious footsteps, no moving objects, no childish laughter. It was as if Eliza, having achieved her purpose, had finally moved on. It was on my last night at the cabin, packing up to return to Boston the next day, that I heard it one final time. The soft sound of a child's laughter. Just once, faint but unmistakable, drifting down from upstairs. "Goodbye, Eliza," I said aloud. "Rest easy now." The cabin creaked once in response, and then was silent. 6 months later, my novel, The Haunting of Lark Pond, was published to modest success. I returned to my life in Boston, the events of the cabin gradually taking on a dreamlike quality. Had I really been guided by a ghost to solve a 50-year-old murder? Or had I simply stumbled upon the remains by chance? My writer's imagination filling in the supernatural elements. Until the dreams began. They started about a month after the book's publication. Always the same, Eliza in the forest, beckoning me to follow. But instead of leading me to her burial site, she now led me deeper into the woods, to places I'd never seen before. Each dream ended the same way. Eliza pointing urgently at something just out of my view, her face desperate, before I woke up. I called Susan in Vermont. "Has anything unusual happened there recently? Anything connected to Eliza's case?" "Not that I know of," she said. "The police closed the investigation officially last month. Case solved, even if the killer's long dead. Why do you ask? I told her about the dreams. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. You should come back, she said finally. There's something I didn't tell you before. Something I've never told anyone. 2 days later, I was driving back to Vermont. Susan met me at the diner where we'd first talked about Eliza. I didn't tell you everything about Eliza's home life, she began without preamble. It wasn't just her father who was problematic. Her mother, Caroline, knew what was happening. She did nothing to stop it. That's terrible, but not exactly unexpected in abuse cases, I said. It was more than that. Susan leaned forward. The night before Eliza disappeared, she came to my house. She was scared, more scared than I'd ever seen her. She said her parents had been fighting about her, that her mother had called her the problem, and said things would be better if she wasn't around anymore. My blood chilled. Are you saying her mother was involved in her death? I don't know. I was 12, Thomas. I didn't understand everything that was happening, but when they found Eliza's body last year, when they determined Edward had killed her, I've wondered if there was more to the story. In my dreams, Eliza was trying to show me something else, something we missed. That night, back at the cabin I'd rented again, I dreamed of Eliza pointing at the pond behind the cabin. In the dream, it was winter again, the pond frozen solid. Halfway across, she stomped her foot against the ice. Cracks spread outward from the impact, spiderwebbing across the pond's surface. I woke with a start, the image of those cracks still vivid in my mind. The pond. Whatever Eliza was trying to show me, it was in the pond. I called Harold Grantham, hoping his knowledge of the property might help. That pond wasn't always there, you know, he told me. What do you mean? It was a sinkhole originally. Appeared suddenly in the summer of '65. My father was still managing the property then. Ground just collapsed one day, and rainwater gradually filled it in. I leaned forward. Was there anything unusual about the sinkhole? Harold scratched his chin thoughtfully. Well, there was an old stone well on that part of the property. Got swallowed up when the sinkhole formed. Family legend says it was dug in the 1800s. Went down at least 40 feet. My pulse quickened. A well under the pond? With help from Harold's grandson, who worked for an environmental survey company, we scanned the pond and discovered a circular structure about 6 feet in diameter exactly where a well might be. A team of divers eventually recovered a rusted metal box from the bottom of that well, preserved in a waterproof container. Inside were letters. Love letters from Caroline Coleman to someone named Robert, dated throughout 1972. The last one was dated the day before Eliza disappeared. Sheriff Harmon read it aloud. Dearest Robert, Edward knows. There was a terrible fight last night. He threatened to take Eliza away, make sure I never see her again. I can't let that happen. By the time you receive this, everything will be taken care of. Wait for me as planned. I'll come to you as soon as it's safe. All my love, Caroline. Also in the box was a life insurance policy taken out on Edward Coleman 6 months before Eliza disappeared, with Caroline as the sole beneficiary. The pieces fell into place. A picture far more complex than we'd imagined. Caroline was planning to leave Edward and run away with her lover, but something went wrong. Eliza must have witnessed something or known something she shouldn't have. Caroline was tracked down in Arizona, living under her maiden name. When confronted with the evidence, she confessed to a version of events that placed all blame on her long-dead husband. She claimed Edward had killed Eliza in a rage after discovering Caroline's plans to leave, and that she had merely disposed of incriminating evidence in the well. It was a convenient story, one that placed all blame on a man unable to defend himself. The timing of the life insurance policy was particularly suspicious, but proving anything different after 5 decades would be nearly impossible. Caroline was charged with obstruction of justice and accessory after the fact, the most they could make stick after so much time. She would likely never serve prison time given her age and health, but At least some version of the truth had finally come to light. As for Eliza, whether her spirit had actually guided me, or whether some combination of local gossip and writer's intuition had led me to the evidence, I couldn't say for certain, but the dream stopped after we found the box in the well. The cabin returned to being just a cabin, an old building with normal creaks and normal shadows. On my last day in Vermont, I visited Eliza's grave one final time. "I hope you can rest now," I said finally. "The truth is out. Not all of it, maybe, but enough. Enough for justice, at least." A breeze stirred the trees overhead, sending a shower of autumn leaves swirling around me. For just a moment, I thought I caught the faint sound of a child's laughter on the wind, not eerie or ghostly, but light and free, like a burden had been lifted. I've never returned to Vermont since then. My second novel, based on the full story of the Coleman case, was more successful than the first. Critics called it hauntingly authentic, and praised its complex exploration of family secrets and delayed justice. None knew that the most unbelievable parts were actually true. Sometimes, on cold winter nights when the wind rattles my windows in Boston, I think about that cabin by the pond. I wonder if new renters ever hear footsteps upstairs, or find objects moved when they're not looking. I wonder if Eliza still watches over the place where her short life ended so tragically. But mostly, I wonder if I truly was guided by a ghost, or if I simply stumbled upon a 50-year-old crime through coincidence and curiosity. The rational part of me wants to believe the latter. But late at night, when the boundaries between the possible and impossible seem thinner, I know what I experienced. A ghost saved my life by giving it purpose when I needed it most. Or so I thought. In truth, perhaps it was the other way around. Perhaps I helped save her, bringing her the peace that had eluded her for decades. If you're listening to this and have experienced something you can't explain, something that exists in that shadowy space between reality and the supernatural, trust your instincts. Sometimes the most incredible explanation is the right one, and sometimes those we think are gone are still with us, still trying to communicate if only we're willing to listen. So check your doors, look carefully at the shadows in your room, and pay attention to those inexplicable sounds in the night. You never know who might be trying to tell you something. If my story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more true tales from the edge of understanding. After all, the line between this world and the next might be thinner than we think. Sleep well, or try to. Story number 4. Hey there, fellow night owls and seekers of the unexplained. Have you ever wondered what would happen if those whispered legends about summoning spirits were actually true? What if the barrier between our world and theirs is thinner than we think? I've spent years collecting stories from people who've experienced things they can't explain. And let me tell you, this one keeps me up at night. If you're tucked in bed right now, you might want to check that your doors are locked and your windows are sealed tight. Because once you know how to call a ghost into your home, it might not want to leave. The most terrifying part? This could happen to anyone, even you. So get comfortable, dim your lights, and join me as we explore what happens when the veil between worlds is lifted. Make sure you stick around until the very end. There's a twist that still gives me chills every time I think about it. If you enjoy being scared, you won't want to miss this. And if you've ever experienced anything like what you're about to hear, please share your story in the comments below. Now, let's begin our journey into the unknown. The story begins now. I never believed in ghosts. Not really. At least that's what I told myself before, that night in October, when everything changed. My name is Riley Cooper, and I live in a small town called Pinewood, just outside of Portland, Maine. It's the kind of place where fog rolls in from the coast each evening like clockwork, and where old stories tend to stick around longer than they should. I work from home as a graphic designer, which means I spend a lot of time alone in my little two-bedroom craftsman that's older than my grandparents. You know the type. Creaky hardwood floors, strange drafts even when all the windows are closed, and that feeling sometimes that you're not quite alone. Just an old house settling, I always told myself. It began on a Tuesday. Nothing special about Tuesdays. That's what makes this even more unsettling. I was scrolling through social media when a notification popped up from my friend Mia. We'd been friends since high school, but she'd moved to Arizona for work 2 years ago. We still kept in touch, sending each other weird articles and videos. "Check this out," her message read, with a link to a video titled "The Midnight Game: How to Summon a Visitor." The video showed a woman with dark hair explaining an old ritual. The ancients believed that at exactly midnight, the veil between worlds thins, she explained. If you perform these simple steps, you can invite a spirit into your home. But be warned, once invited, they may never leave. I rolled my eyes. Another internet challenge. But as she continued explaining the ritual, I felt a strange pull. It was so simple it seemed ridiculous. 3 candles placed in a triangle, a personal object in the center, 3 knocks on the floor, 3 whispered invitations. Then wait. Remember, intention matters. Don't call if you're not prepared for an answer. I closed the laptop and laughed it off. But the thought lingered. What if? "This is so stupid," I said out loud to my empty living room as I found myself gathering 3 candles from the emergency kit I kept for power outages. I placed them in a triangle on my coffee table. In the center, I put my grandfather's pocket watch, the only thing I had of his. He'd died before I was born, but my mom always said we would have gotten along well, that we were similar souls. The digital clock on my microwave read 11:58 p.m. Close enough to midnight for an experiment that wouldn't work anyway, right? I lit the candles one by one, feeling slightly foolish, but also something else. Anticipation? Fear? I couldn't quite name it. Following the instructions, I knelt beside the coffee table and knocked on the hardwood floor 3 times. The sounds seemed to echo louder than they should have in my small living room. "If there's anyone there, I invite you into my home," I whispered, feeling my heart beating faster despite my skepticism. I repeated it twice more, each time a little louder, until the final invitation seemed to hang in the air. And then, nothing. Of course, nothing happened. What did I expect? I blew out the candles, put away the pocket watch, and decided it was time for bed. As I turned off the lights and headed toward my bedroom, I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. 3 distinct knocks coming from somewhere inside the house. I froze, my hand still on the light switch. It was just the house settling. Old houses make noises. Everyone knows that. "Hello?" I called out, immediately feeling foolish. There was no one there. There couldn't be. Silence answered me, and I laughed nervously. "Get it together, Riley. It's just your imagination." I climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin despite the mild temperature. Just as my eyes began to drift closed, the familiar sound of my refrigerator humming in the kitchen suddenly stopped. The power had gone out. Not unusual for Pinewood, but the timing made my skin crawl. I reached for my phone to check the time. 12:01 a.m. It was exactly midnight when I'd completed the ritual, and exactly midnight when the power went out. Just a coincidence, I told myself, just a coincidence. But as I lay there in the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in my house, that the darkness in the corners seemed deeper somehow, that the silence wasn't quite silent anymore, that I wasn't alone. "It's nothing," I whispered to myself, "just go to sleep." But sleep didn't come easily that night, and when it finally did, my dreams were filled with shadows that moved on their own, and the endless sound of knocking, getting louder and louder, until I shot upright in bed, gasping for air. The power was back on. Morning light streamed through my curtains. Everything was normal. Except, on my nightstand, where I definitely hadn't left it, sat my grandfather's pocket watch. The glass face was foggy, as if someone had been breathing on it. And the hands, which had been frozen at 3:42 for as long as I'd owned it, they were moving. Tick, tick, tick. The next few days passed in a strange haze. I told myself repeatedly that nothing had happened that night. The pocket watch? I must have brought it to my room without remembering. The power outage? Common in our area. The knocking? Old houses make noises. But even as I rationalized everything away, little things kept happening that were harder to explain. The coffee pot would be full when I came downstairs, though I didn't remember brewing any. The TV would switch channels on its own. Books I was certain I'd left on the shelf would be open on the coffee table. And always that feeling of being watched. "You're just being paranoid," I muttered to myself on Friday morning as I searched for my car keys, which weren't in the bowl by the door where I always left them. After 10 minutes of increasingly frantic searching, I found them in the refrigerator of all places. "I must be losing my mind," I said with a nervous laugh. "Not your mind, just your solitude." The voice was so faint I almost didn't hear it, like a whisper carried on a breeze. I spun around, nearly dropping my keys again. "Hello?" My voice cracked. "Is someone there?" Silence answered me. Just my imagination. It had to be. My friend Jake called to invite me to a movie at the old Pinewood Theater. The distraction sounded perfect. By the time I drove home, my knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel too hard. Standing on my porch, key in hand, I hesitated. What was waiting for me inside? For a wild moment, I considered calling Jake, asking if I could crash at his place. But what would I say? That I was afraid of my own house because of some internet ritual I'd tried? "This is ridiculous," I said firmly and pushed the door open. The house was dark, except for a single lamp in the living room. A lamp I was certain I'd turned off before leaving. I stood in the entryway listening. The house felt different. Charged, somehow, like the air before a storm. "Hello?" I called out, feeling both foolish and terrified. Is someone here?" The sound of my grandfather's pocket watch ticking suddenly filled the silence, impossibly loud. It was coming from the living room. I followed the sound, heart pounding. The watch sat in the center of the coffee table, the same triangle of candles surrounding it. They weren't lit, but the wax was fresh, melted, as if they'd been burning recently. "I didn't do this," I whispered to the empty room. Or what I hoped was an empty room. The temperature dropped suddenly, dramatically. I could see my breath. The lamp flickered once, twice, then went out, plunging the room into darkness. In the dim light filtering in from the street, I saw the candles light themselves one by one. My legs felt weak. I should run, I thought distantly. I should get out of here right now. But I couldn't move, transfixed by the dancing flames. In their light, I saw something form. Not quite a shape, more like a disturbance in the air. A ripple, like heat rising from hot pavement, but vertical and roughly person-sized. "Who are you?" My voice was barely a whisper. The ripple moved closer, circling the coffee table. The pocket watch's ticking grew faster, more urgent. "You invited me." The voice was clearer now, though still faint. Neither male nor female, neither young nor old, just a voice. "What do you want?" I managed to ask, backing away slowly until I hit the wall. "Company." The simple answer somehow terrified me more than any threat could have. The shape drifted closer. "You've been alone too long in this house, so have I." The air around me grew so cold it burned. I slid along the wall toward the door, never taking my eyes off the ripple in the air. "Please leave," I whispered. "That's not how it works." There was almost amusement in the voice now. "You extended an invitation. There are rules to these things." "What rules? I didn't agree to any rules." Panic was rising in my throat. The oldest rules. The ones written before words. "You called, I came, now we're bound." The shape moved closer still. I felt something brush against my cheek, not quite a touch, more like the memory of one. Cold, so cold. "I have to go," I gasped, fumbling for the door handle behind me. "You can leave this house, Riley Cooper, but I'll be waiting when you return. This is my home now, too. You made it, so—" The way it said my name, as if it had known me forever, sent ice through my veins. I wrenched the door open and stumbled outside, gulping the warm night air. I ran to my car and drove, no destination in mind, just away. I ended up at an all-night diner on the edge of town, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee I couldn't drink, wondering what I'd done, and what I was going to do next. I spent that night in my car, parked in the lot of the 24-hour Walmart. I must have dozed off eventually because I woke to the sound of someone tapping on my window, a concerned-looking security guard asking if I was okay. I drove to the local library, waiting for it to open at 9 a.m. If there were rules to what I'd done, I needed to know them. I needed information. I spent hours there, flipping through dusty books on New England folklore and paranormal investigations. One book, older than the rest with a cracked leather cover, contained an account from 1887 about a woman in Pinewood who'd performed a similar ritual. The details made my blood run cold. 3 candles, a personal object, 3 invitations. She reported a presence moving into her home, one that grew stronger over time, manifesting first as moved objects and cold spots, then as apparitions and voices. The account ended abruptly. A newspaper clipping tucked into the pages reported that the woman had died in a house fire. The cause? 3 candles left burning unattended. I slammed the book shut. This was ridiculous. I was scaring myself over nothing. There had to be a rational explanation for what was happening in my house, but deep down, I knew. Something had answered my call. As evening approached, I realized I couldn't avoid going home forever. Whatever was happening, I needed to face it. Armed with information from my research and a small bag of items purchased from a New Age shop downtown, sage, salt, and a small silver bell, I drove back to my house. It looked so normal from the outside. Just a small blue Craftsman with white trim and potted mums on the porch steps. Nothing to suggest what waited inside. "Just get it over with," I muttered to myself as I unlocked the door. The house was quiet. For a moment, I felt foolish all over again. Had I imagined the whole thing? I set my bag down and walked cautiously through each room, turning on lights as I went. Nothing seemed out of place. In the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water, my shoulders finally beginning to relax. Welcome home. The glass slipped from my hand, shattering on the tile floor. The voice had come from right behind me. I turned slowly. Nothing was there, but the air seemed thicker somehow, like looking through heat waves. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "I told you, company." The ripple in the air moved toward the living room. I found myself following it, glass crunching under my shoes. "Why me?" I asked. "You called. You were lonely. So was I." I watched as the ripple settled onto my couch, taking on a more defined shape, still transparent, still not quite there, but more human-like now. I could almost make out shoulders, a head, the suggestion of a person sitting there. Against all reason, I sat in the armchair across from it. "Are you a ghost?" A sound like distant laughter. "That's your word for it. I existed before. Now I exist differently." "Did you die in this house?" "No, but I've been here a long time watching, waiting, until you finally noticed me." I frowned. "What do you mean? I just did that ritual a few days ago." "The ritual didn't bring me here, Riley. It just opened your eyes to what was already present." I've been with you since you moved in. 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days ago. The precision sent a chill through me. That's impossible. I would have noticed. Would you? The books that disappeared and reappeared in different places. The dreams you couldn't quite remember. The feeling of being watched. You noticed, you just didn't want to see. I thought back over the years in this house, all the little unexplained occurrences I'd dismissed. If you've been here all along, why show yourself now? Because you asked. Because you're finally ready to see. The shape leaned forward, its edges becoming slightly more defined. Because you're different from the others who've lived here. You're receptive. The others? You mean the previous owners? They came and went. None stayed long. Did you drive them away? Another laugh, this one closer, more real. Some. Others left for their own reasons. This house has seen much coming and going. Much life, much death. Death? My mouth went dry. Has someone died here? The shape seemed to consider this. Many someones. Over many years. This land remembers. I thought of the woman from the 1887 account. The house fire. Are you dangerous? All things unknown are dangerous, Riley Cooper. The question is whether the danger outweighs the benefit. What benefit could there possibly be to having a ghost in my house? I asked, then immediately regretted the skeptical tone as the temperature around me plummeted. Protection, knowledge, company in the long night hours when sleep eludes you and the silence grows too loud. The voice grew harder. You called me forth, Riley. You don't get to question my purpose now. I stood up, suddenly angry despite my fear. This is my house. I get to question whatever I want. Our house now, it corrected, rising also, the shape growing taller, more imposing. By your invitation. By the old rules. Then I uninvite you, I shouted, reaching for the bag of items I'd bought. I want you gone. The shape surged forward suddenly, and I fell back into the chair, the bag dropping from my hands. The temperature dropped so rapidly that frost formed on the windows. It doesn't work that way, it hissed, looming over me. What's invited cannot be uninvited. What's seen cannot be unseen. What's known cannot be unknown. I pressed myself back into the chair, heart hammering. Then what happens now? The cold receded slightly. The shape drifted back, resuming its place on the couch. Now we coexist. You live your life. I observe. Sometimes I participate. We learn from each other. And if I refuse, you won't. The certainty in its voice disturbed me. You're curious, Riley. You always have been. It's what I've observed in you these 3 years. You want to know things. Now you can know me. It wasn't wrong. Despite my fear, there was a part of me that wanted to understand, to know more. What should I call you? I asked finally. The shape seemed to brighten slightly, as if pleased by the question. I've had many names over the years. The last person who saw me called me Thomas. Thomas, I repeated. It felt strangely normal, giving a name to this, whatever it was. How long do you intend to stay, Thomas? How long do you... It countered. We looked at each other across the living room. Me, a tired graphic designer still in yesterday's clothes, and Thomas, a shape made of disturbed air and centuries of existence. And somehow, in that moment, I knew my life had irrevocably changed. There would be no going back to before. There was only forward, into this new reality where the veil between worlds had been lifted. For better or worse, Thomas and I were now sharing this house. And I had a feeling this was just the beginning. A month passed, then 2. Living with a ghost, it turns out, becomes something close to normal if you let it. Thomas and I developed a strange routine. I would wake each morning to find my coffee already made, courtesy of my spectral roommate who didn't need sleep. In return, I would leave the TV on at night. tuned to documentary channels that Thomas seemed to enjoy. We would have conversations in the evenings, me speaking aloud, Thomas responding in that voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I learned that Thomas had lived in Pinewood in the late 1800s, though he was vague about the details of his life and death. My friends noticed the difference in me. Jake commented that I seemed more relaxed, more present. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up," he said during our weekly coffee meetup. If only he knew I'd been talking to a ghost every night. As winter settled over Pinewood, bringing early darkness and the first snowfalls, Thomas grew stronger. I could see him more clearly now, not just a ripple in the air, but a definite shape of a tall, slender man in outdated clothing. His features were still indistinct, like looking at someone through frosted glass, but sometimes, in certain lights, I could almost make out eyes, a mouth, the suggestion of dark hair. But as comfortable as our coexistence had become, there was still so much I didn't understand. The account I'd read at the library haunted me. The woman who'd died in a fire after inviting a spirit into her home. When I tried to ask Thomas about it, he changed the subject or disappeared entirely, sometimes for days. "Is there something you're not telling me?" I asked him one night in January, after waking from a nightmare of fire and screaming. Thomas was by the window watching snowfall. His form seemed more solid than usual, more present. "There are many things I haven't told you, Riley. Some things are better left in the past." "Not if they affect me," I insisted. "Not if they're causing these nightmares." He turned toward me, and for the first time, I could clearly see his eyes. Deep, sorrowful, old, beyond measure. "The past and present blur for me sometimes," he admitted. "Memories become intrusive. Perhaps you're sensing them. What memories, Thomas? What happened to you? How did you die?" He moved away from the window, his form growing less distinct as he did. "Some questions shouldn't be answered, Riley." "I deserve to know," I pressed. "This is my home." "Our home," he corrected, an edge entering his voice. "As you invited me to make it." The temperature in the room dropped sharply. Books rattled on their shelves. A picture frame fell, the glass cracking against the hardwood floor. "Thomas," I said carefully, "you're scaring me." The cold receded immediately. The rattling stopped. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice genuinely contrite. "I don't mean to frighten you, never you, Riley." The tenderness in his voice caught me off guard. Over these months, we developed a rapport, even a friendship of sorts. But there was something more in his tone now. Something that made me wonder exactly what Thomas felt toward me. "Just tell me the truth," I said softly. "Please." He was silent for so long I thought he might have disappeared again. Finally, he spoke. "The woman you read about, the one from 1887, her name was Eleanor Blackwood." My breath caught. "You knew her?" "Yes." His form drifted toward the fireplace, which I never used, but which now suddenly lit itself, flames climbing up from nothing. "I knew her very well." The way he said it made something click in my mind. "You were close to her?" "She was my wife." The simple statement hung in the air between us. I sank onto the couch, processing this revelation. "What happened, Thomas?" "The account I read said she died in a fire." "She did." His voice was hollow with old grief. "We both did." A chill that had nothing to do with the supernatural ran through me. "Both of you? Then why are you here and she isn't?" Thomas moved closer to the fire, his form becoming more defined in its light. I could see him clearly now, a man in his 30s perhaps, with dark hair and a well-trimmed beard, wearing clothes from another century. He looked solid, almost alive, but with a transparency that reminded me of his true nature. "Eleanor couldn't stay," he said simply. "She had no unfinished business. I did." "What unfinished business?" He turned to look at me fully, and I gasped. In the firelight, I could see his face clearly for the first time, and it was familiar in a way that made no sense. "You have her eyes," he said softly, "her smile. Even the way you tilt your head when you're thinking hard about something." "What are you talking about?" I whispered, though part of me already knew, already felt the truth settling into my bones. "Eleanor was with child when we died," Thomas said. "A girl who never drew breath in this world. But souls are persistent things, Riley. They find their way back, generation after generation." I stood on shaky legs, backing away from him. "That's impossible." "You're saying I'm what? The reincarnation of your unborn child?" "Not exactly, but her soul. Your soul. It's been in your family line for generations. I've watched over all of you, waiting for the right one to return to this house, to come home. My family." My voice was barely audible. "You mean your mother, your grandmother, your great-grandmother. All carrying a piece of what should have been our daughter. All drawn back to Pinewood eventually, but none of them could see me. None of them stayed. Until you." I thought of my mother, who'd grown up in Pinewood but left as soon as she could, always saying the town felt too heavy with memories. I thought of my grandmother, who'd lived in this very house briefly before moving away, claiming it never felt like home despite being her childhood home. I thought of my own inexplicable draw to return to Pinewood after college, to buy this specific house when it came on the market, despite having no real connection to it. "What happens now?" I asked finally. Thomas moved toward me, his form growing less distinct again. "Now you choose. Knowing everything, you can still ask me to remain distant, to be nothing more than a presence at the edges of your perception. Or you can help me find peace, help us all find peace." "How?" Thomas's form flickered. "By acknowledging what lies beneath, by remembering what was forgotten, by completing what was left undone." I understood then what he was asking. Not just recognition, but release. The chance to finally rest after his long vigil. "Would you move on? Leave?" The thought brought an unexpected pang of loss. "I don't know what lies beyond this state of being," Thomas admitted. "Perhaps nothing. Perhaps everything. But I've remained between worlds for too long, Riley. The weight of it. The loneliness." "But you wouldn't be alone anymore," I said quickly. "You have me now. I can see you, talk to you." He smiled sadly. "And that has been the greatest gift. But it isn't natural, this half-life I lead, nor is it natural for you to bind yourself to the past this way. You should live, Riley. Fully live, in ways I can no longer remember." I helped Thomas find peace. We discovered the remains of his and Eleanor's bodies in the foundation of the house and gave them a proper burial. On the day of the small ceremony, Thomas appeared to me one last time, with Eleanor and the faint outline of a child beside him. "My family," Thomas said, his voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. "Complete at last." "Will I see you again?" I asked, tears in my eyes. "Perhaps. In dreams, in moments between waking and sleep. In that feeling you get sometimes of not being quite alone." Thomas reached out his hand, and I took it one last time. Eleanor placed her ghostly hand on ours. The child shape did the same. For a moment I felt a surge of warmth, of love, of connection that transcended time and death and generations of separation. Then they were fading, becoming transparent, their forms dissolving into soft light that filled the room briefly before diminishing to nothing. "Goodbye," I whispered to the empty air. Spring came to Pinewood, melting the snow and bringing new life to the world. My house felt different now. Lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from its foundations. No more cold spots, no more moving objects, no more whispered conversations in the night. I missed Thomas, missed our talks, even missed the little ways he'd made his presence known. But I also felt a sense of rightness, of completion. What had been broken was mended. What had been lost was found. What had been bound was released. That night, I lit 3 candles and placed them on my coffee table, not in a ritual of summoning, but in remembrance. As the flames flickered in the darkness, I thought about what happens when you call a ghost into your home. Sometimes, you find family you never knew you had. Sometimes, you uncover truths buried beneath the foundations of your life. Sometimes, you help lost souls find their way to peace. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find your own peace in the process. As I blew out the candles, I felt it again. That gentle touch against my cheek, that sense of not being quite alone. Not a haunting now, but a blessing. Not a presence trapped between worlds, but a love that transcends them. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more tales from the shadows. Have you ever felt a presence in your home that you couldn't explain? Share your experiences in the comments below, and remember, sometimes, when you call into the darkness, something answers back. Sleep tight, everyone.